Hello everybody and welcome to Forever Rugby on Forever Sports for today's Currie Cup semi-final review. And the story of yesterday is that it will be a Bulls versus Sharks Currie Cup final at Loftus next week Saturday, which will be the 30th of January. Time still to be confirmed. Whatever the time is, we will be live here on Forever Sports doing a live watch along. Thank you everybody who tuned in yesterday. It was a lot of fun. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you never miss those live watch alongs. We're going to be doing a lot more of them as the months go by. So much sport happening. We've got cricket series coming up. We've got various rugby in Europe, as well as the Rainbow Cup to build towards, as well as potentially a British and Irish Lions tour. So make sure you are subscribed. Smash like on the video if you like the sort of content as well. Right, so the two semi-finals, both of them probably not the best exhibition of South African rugby in terms of really good rugby, in terms of very open and aggressive and free-flowing, and a sign of sort of attacking intent. It wasn't the best sort of advert for SA Rugby, if we're going to be brutally honest. Two pretty sloppy games. I will say that I think in the Western Province Sharks games, it was a decent advert in terms of defense, because both sides were very good in the defensive line, didn't miss a lot of tackles, and it was very difficult for them to score. However, they were both sides also very guilty of just not being clinical at the right stages. The Western Province far more than the Sharks. And I think the Western Province, I mean, they had so many opportunities to try and put on points, but they were sloppy with lineouts and sometimes scrums and knock-on stuff like that. Equally so were the Lions. Too many handling areas, too many basic areas at vital stages of the game. And what the Sharks and the Bulls were better at than their counterparts yesterday was simply making the opportunities count. They were far more clinical in terms of getting into point-scoring areas and actually getting reward for their efforts. And I think that is the key when it comes to playoff rugby, is the fact that you've got to be clinical when it comes to taking your points, to taking your opportunities. And I mean, the Sharks not necessarily put the game to bed, but they were 9-0 up after 11 minutes through the boot of Currien Bosch. I mean, terrific kicking from the fly half, definitely the form fly half of the competition. But it just came down to the Western Province, conceding 3 penalties in the first 10 minutes, and all within cricket kicking positions, which when you're playing against the Sharks is anything up to the opposition 10-meter line, because Currien Bosch has a 60-meter kick. So yeah, so I think the big questions are, before we look at sort of the Bulls and the Sharks a little bit, where to now for the Lions in the Western Province? And I think for the Lions, they are arguably in a better place, because I think that they will look at the Cup and they'll say, we went out to the best side in the competition, we were competitive. I mean, 26-21 is not exactly a thrashing, especially when you look at previous Yerkes derbies. Generally, it is quite a big scoreline. So I think the Lions will look at the competition and say that they had some very, very good moments. They had the Sharks game, they had the Western Province game, they had some good performances over the tournament. They also had some disappointing performances. And I think they're going to look at their squad and they're going to think, you know what, we've got quite a mixture of young players and some experienced players. I mean, you look at that front row. Carlu Sadi is still relatively inexperienced. Tisa Toli has come into his own. Jakob Asaki is new at the Union. Lots. And what was disappointing yesterday is that your locks for your Lions are two most experienced players in Marvin Ory and Willem Albers, and they both received yellow cards. But the loose trio, Len Massane is very early into his rugby career. Vincent Tuka, a very good up-and-coming youngster. Jack Creel coming back to form. But then you got the likes of Andre Warner, still early in his Lions career, as well as Morley van den Berg. Alton Yankee is very experienced, yes, so is Courtney Kassan. But after that, Burko Woodendal, yes, he brings a lot of experience from the Bulls. But Wandisia Similani, young up-and-coming player, as is Steven Pienaar. Dan Creel is still quite a young player. So the bulk of the squad is quite young, and it's a weird sort of combination of very young and very old. And there's not too much in between, I think, which is potentially the problem with the Lions. Because you've got your Lani du Plessis, your Willem Alberts, but then you don't have too many players who are sort of that 26, 27, that magical sort of in your prime sort of years. But I think that they'll look at the competition and think, you know what, it was a big building step. And I think the big thing for them was to prove that they were within the top 4 sides in the country, prove that they were better than the Cheetahs after having a very poor Super Rugby last year, to prove that they deserved to be in the Rainbow Cup, which they did. And especially with that emphatic victory over the Cheetahs themselves. For the Western Province, for me, there are far bigger question marks, because you look at the squad and there's experience, there's talent, there's pride and proven players there, and they're just not firing on all cylinders. I mean, yes, Steven Kitshoff didn't play, but they've got 4 Springbok Cat players as front row options. I mean, they've got Skara Ntabeni, Springbok Cap, on the bench for them. You've got Salman Murat, a junior Springbok captain. JD Schikkeling, been around the block. That loose trio, yes, Pete Steph-Toya is injured, but even apart from that, there's so much talent in that loose trio. Herschel Yankees, World Cup winner. Damian Willemse, World Cup winner. Warwick Galant is injured, yes, but I mean, And maybe the backline is largely quite inexperienced. I think maybe that's a place where they probably need to bring a few players in. But it's a team that should have been a lot more competitive over the tournament, should have put in much better, bigger performances. And you can point a lot to the problems within the Western Province, to the boardroom politics, and the fact that the union is largely in a mess. You know, when you've got so much happening off the field and so many issues off the field, it becomes very difficult to then produce on the field. And we've seen that in multiple different occasions. You know, the Lions, you know, during that whole committee issue where they were going to buy the Lions and put lots of money in, and they walked out, stuff like that. It was a very sort of a season of turmoil for the Lions, and they struggled to sort of ignore what's happening off the field. Since the sort of the more settledness of the union, that was during their prime years, when they were settled as a union, where the money was no issue, where the coaching staff was settled, and they would thrive. So that's the biggest thing with the Western Province. They need to sort out the boardroom politics so they can focus on what's going on the field. For the Sharks and the Bulls, I think it's going to be a very good game. I think the Sharks could have probably scored more points yesterday, could have been better. Equally, I think the Bulls could have been better. I think that for the large part, for the last sort of 12 months, those two have been the best sides. The Sharks were the best side by a country mile in Super Rugby last year, and haven't quite discovered that form during Super Rugby Unlocked and Currie Cup. You know, a couple of players leaving, but not really. I mean, it was Andre Esterhuizen really was the big one that left. But the Bulls have been phenomenal since the beginning of Super Rugby Unlocked, and that's been Jake White has come in and brought a whole lot of big players. So it is going to be the two form sides of the last 12 months in the Currie Cup final, which is probably right and probably fair. And I think it's going to be an interesting game in that, much like yesterday's contests, the Sharks thrive in a more open and more fast-natured game, whereas the Bulls will want to slow it down. So it's going to be quite a tactical battle, I think. Especially the Bulls are going to have to be much better under the high ball than some other teams have been, because Curran Bosch and Sanel Nahama, Jaden Hendricks, I wouldn't be surprised if you see Jaden Hendricks start, actually. We'll do our team of the week tomorrow, as well as the 5 things learned over the week. But there's some big performances from the Sharks players. The Bulls will have the advantage. They are the overriding favourites. Some big performances from Strivino Jacobs, from Cornel Hendricks. Dwayne Vermeulen is as always. Ulrich Lowe really coming to his own. And then you've got Arno Boers coming off the bench. It's a phenomenal squad. But I think the biggest thing that we would like to see in the final is just a better standard of rugby. You know, better tackling, more sort of structure. You know, less errors, less handling errors, less set pieces necessarily, and just some more free flowing rugby. I mean, I don't mind set pieces, but it needs to be earned. You know, if it's earned from hard earned penalties and you're getting kicked into the corner and having lineouts, that's fine. But we're seeing too many scrums from just poor handling errors. You know, which not even coming down to pressure. It's just basic mistakes. So I think that's the biggest issue of the last 2 days, is that on the last day, is that we just didn't see a particularly high standard of rugby, and hopefully that'll change in the coming week. But at the end of the day, the important thing now is pretty much, I mean, this is all just building up towards the Rainbow Cup, and I think Rassie Erasmus and all the coaches are very aware of the fact that this is almost a preseason in many ways, of trying to sort of sort out players, trying to see where their union is at before they go to the real competition against the likes of Ulster, Munster, Edinburgh, you know, these really top European sides when we hit the Rainbows Cup later on this year. So that's the main thing about this competition. And for me, it's always been the main thing about this whole thing, is to just sort of let the unions establish themselves and find out where they are ahead of the move to Europe, which is going to be the big sort of move. But let me know what you thought of the 2 games in the comments down below. Smash a like on the video. Do subscribe to the channel. My name is Steven, and I'll chat to you guys very, very soon.